Hello everybody, this is Megan aka The Cowler, and welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to do a border design of some kind and have a central focus theme in the center. So with that in mind, I ended up settling on doing like a Joan of Arc or just like a female knight, and I wanted her to be like center stage, but then I just wanted to have like a fun little whimsical border around it and then keep it overall simple. I ended up trying to blend two colors together. I basically took like a yellow and a turquoise because I really wanted this like nice shadow like lighting behind her. And when I was doing my test swatches for these two colors, I noticed that, like, especially with the turquoise and the orange, which were like the main colors that I was using to try to do the blending, it ended up very muddy. So I used yellow as like a nice little in-between tone, so if they did overlap, you're just creating more of a green, but it allowed me to kind of go back in with some richer tones with the orange and really pop out the colors that way. However, what I will say is I definitely should have bought like a proper wash brush. Trying to do the large areas and not have it be so patchy ended up being a lot more difficult than I thought it was. I was like, oh no, I got this. This will be fine, easy, no worries. But no, I wouldn't say that's the case. I ended up having to do like a lot of layers, very like thin layers to kind of slowly build up the color to the intensity I wanted. But I also went back in and did hatching on the parts to kind of help give it more texture to it, so it wasn't so kind of all over the place. And then I discovered that tape exists and I could just tape down the drawing, because especially when I was trying to use large washes of water, I don't know if you guys done watercolor before, but it likes to buckle if you don't have it prepared in a certain way, and I didn't think about that, and I ended up kind of going a little crazy with it, so I just kind of tacked it down on the top and bottom to help at least minimize some of that. And then I had a color thumbnail that I was working off of, so I wasn't too concerned about just working in one area for too long. If anything, I knew that if I couldn't get the background right, I was just gonna scrap it and do the whole process over again. So I feel like taking my time to slowly build up the colors to where I wanted it was like my main focus, because I really wanted that like deep, intense like turquoise in the background, juxtaposed by this like nice like ombre effect with the orange going up into the yellows. I think for what I was trying to pull off, it wasn't too bad. I will say, like, what I have as like my thumbnail colors on Procreate, I personally like better, but you know, there's only trying to like replicate that. I don't think I did that bad of a job. But overall, I would start off with like a base tone of whatever that main color was going to be for that section, and then just slowly build up colors and trying to build intensity, because I didn't want to go too far too quickly and then have to backtrack, because it's a lot harder to like undo those types of mistakes than it is trying to just work with what you already have. So with the hair, I knew I wanted it to be almost like a reddish brown tone, so I ended up just doing a very like light tone of yellow, start bringing in other hues, and then used red as like my shadowing shadows before I started bringing browns in to kind of like rich, I don't know how I would say it. Like basically I wanted it to be I wanted it to lean more brown, but I also wanted to make sure that you still had a little bit of that red hue, so I was using that in the shading. A lot of this was like back and forth between two different colors and then like slowly building up the intensity. And then I think I went back through with the orange in certain spots to kind of really like give it some color diversity. I didn't want it to be all one particular shade. I wanted it to kind of feel like it had that light source in there. But overall, I wanted to make sure that there was different color shifts in there. It wasn't all just the one or two colors, but I knew I was going to add a lot of layers to really deepen it. So I wasn't too concerned from which points it was going. And a lot of that was also like adding the line details so that it matched the background, matched the other elements that I was going to tie in there, and started doing the hair. So I will say, when working on the hair, it was slightly difficult in terms of like, at first I didn't know exactly where I wanted all the hair string placements to be, so I was kind of wishy-washy on it, and it took me a little bit to just kind of play around with it, build it up, and get it to the intensity I wanted, while also like starting to add in more hard cuts for her hair strands. But once that was done, I was like, thank gosh, and moved on to the next project. So working on the skin tone, I just did a very light wash, but I was working off of a reference, so I wanted to make sure that I really kept like that shadow in there, because I find that sometimes I tend to like soften shadows and I don't keep that harsh lighting that you would see in just like nature, and so I wanted to make sure I fixed that. And in this case, it was more or less around the hands, making sure that there was that like deeper shadow for where it grips the hilt. And I could have pushed it further, I'm not gonna lie. But for what it is, I don't think it's too bad. And then I wanted to make sure that like I kept a very like serious expression for the face, and kind of brought your eye towards the center. So I was making sure like some of the shadows were built around that and like really like grabbed your attention. Now I do think I forgot to do the shadow blushing on the hands. Like I normally do it for the fingers, the cheeks, and any parts where joints are. So like the shoulders, the elbow, the kneecaps. I like to have like a little blushing, body blushing basically. But I totally got sidetracked and that did not happen, which is a tragedy, but we move on. Now for the armor itself, I started doing some of the little accents in yellow ochre because I didn't know at the time if I wanted to do gold or if I wanted just to like maybe mimic it. But I think I just did the base tone of it and then decided that it needed the gold to kind of really punch that metallic look to it. So I just had it as, if anything else, a undertone base that I would then go back over. And then for the outfit, I was working on a limited color palette, so a lot of it was like the orange, teal, red, and brown were like my main colors of focus, and so I threw in gray there too for the armor because I wanted the armor to be more silver. So I used the red in the clothing because I thought that would be a fun like difference to it, and I think it helped bounce off from the orange in the background. And then I knew I was going to go back in with a cooler tone for the shadows to help kind of tie back in a little bit of that turquoise, so there was more like this harmony to it, I guess you could say. I wanted it to be like a pretty strong red without it being like overwhelming. And now I do know with like the reds that I have, they tend to go pink, so it was a lot of like slow layers building up the color intensity. And then even in the armor itself, I added a little bit of red ink, so that way it was more of a warmer gray, and it had still that like similarity to it because that underlying color is tied out throughout. This is where I come back in with the purples, and I slowly built it up. I think I went way too light on the first one and then started like bringing in more deeper shadows to help with the contrast. But if anything else, use this first pass to kind of get an idea of where all my shadow placements were, and then slowly build up from there, but also keeping more of that hatching there so that way it kept everything the same. Yeah. Now, when it came to the armor itself, I decided that I wanted the upper plate to be a slightly darker shade than what the actual armor was, because I wanted it not to be like one giant gray metal. And so I went ahead and did the first armor, got that all shadowed out, because I was worried that once I went to go mix in the new color, I was totally gonna forget which one was what. So I ended up like just tinting it a little bit darker. I think I ended up adding like, I want to say I added a little bit of blue to it, but I can't say I remember it. But then I used that as my basis for the sword, because I wanted the center part to be really like deep and almost like in the shadow for this crevicing. And so I ended up taking the purple that I was using for the shadows of the red, tied it back in with that, and then for the hilt itself, or that crossguard, I think that's what it's called, I didn't know what color to make it. I could have made it brown or like just black or something, but I decided I was just gonna do what I did with one of the portraits, where I went ahead and just did the shadows and then went back over it with a metallic and just called it a day. I wasn't trying to think that hard at that point. Towards the end I was just like, oh, I wanted to work on something else. But for the border, I wanted to do old parchment type kind of design for it, because I was thinking about having like greens or introducing another color, but I really wanted to keep the center focus and have that be like the pop of color that you see. So I decided just to do something simple, but I wanted to give it some texture to kind of make it feel old. So I went back with a very light wash of like brown and put a tinge of yellow, and then took my brush afterwards with a darker mixture and then started essentially like slapping it across the page. There wasn't really a rhyme or reason for where I was adding it, but I wanted it to be textured, so I went back in with a dry brush after I had laid down the initial patches of color, so that way I could use the bristles to kind of give it some texture to it so that it didn't look too smooth and blended out. I wanted it to feel old, so I just kind of picked random spots. I kind of ended up at some point, I was just like, you know what, your finger can do just as good. So then go back in with like a smaller brush, add colors here and there where I wanted more patch difference that I couldn't really get with the large brush. Took my finger and just started dabbing, so that way I could kind of break it up and then just add a fun texture to it. And then for the border itself, ended up doing like gold, just as my nice little accent to really pop everything. That being said, I hope you guys have a lovely day, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. If you enjoyed, feel free to give a like or subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.